All right, so everybody, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us for the first time, whether it's the radio, the YouTube, the podcast, we appreciate it. If you are listening to us on the internet, as far as the YouTube or the podcast, please like, subscribe, share this interview because we do interview amazing people that are doing amazing things all over the country and all over the world. So we thank you for that. Today we have the one and only William Sargent on. He is going to be talking about the horseshoe crab, and we're going to get into why that's important in just a minute. But he also just authored a book, which just came out, I believe, on September 1st, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. It was called Crab Wars. So definitely check that out on Amazon or in your local bookstore. Again, it's William Sargent, and he authored Crab Wars. So, William, first of all, thanks so much for spending time with us today. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, I am too. Thank you very much. And I love your backdrop in Florida.
That's right. I wish I was that was real, but anyways, we'll move forward with that. Anyways, regardless, so can you tell the audience that's just finding out? Oh, what happened? What? Oh, I don't know what the heck that was. I was wondering what happened. I thought people jumped into our call for a second. Okay. Anyways, I can cut that out. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what the heck my
No
computer
problem.
just did. This is very sketchy. All right. Anyways, after we get on back on track after that, and I will edit that out. So William, can you tell the viewers a little bit about you?
Well, I'm a science writer. I've been writing for about, I hate to admit it, about 40 years. I have 27 books out. And then I also initiated several NOVA films, the NOVA science programs on public television. But that's been keeping me fairly busy.
I bet that's a heck of a lot of books, 27. And obviously, we're going to get into the new one today, which is called Crab Wars. So, William, first of all, what made you get involved in this industry in general?
Well, I grew up as a Cape Cod kid. I spent all my summers on Cape Cod on a wonderful little bay called Pleasant Bay. And after I graduated from college, I set up a little laboratory, and we had students come in from all over the country and to start studying the bay. And one of the first things we discovered were that people were collecting horseshoe crabs. And I was, I had grown up with horseshoe crabs, and as a kid, I used to row my boat out to the outer beach and watch them laying their eggs. And it was, it was a wonderful thing to do under the full moon, and all you could hear were the crabs just sort of crawling over each other. And they've been doing this for 450 million years. But what we found is that they were collecting the crabs for a new industry. There was a guy in Woods Hole, a scientist in Woods Hole, who was actually bleeding them in his basement. And then they were using that blood as a test for what are called gram-negative bacteria. So you separate your bacteria into gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. And they cause a number of often fatal diseases, so that anything that comes in contact with the human blood system, whether it's a syringe or a vaccine or an antibody test, all has to be tested to make sure that it's free of bacteria. And the way they do this is with the brilliant blue blood of the horseshoe crabs.
So I do want to go into the interview, but since you brought it up talking about vaccines and antibody tests, I know the coronavirus vaccine has a lot to do with horseshoe crabs right now. Can you talk to the viewers a little bit of that, since that's going on right now?
Yeah, basically everybody that's listening to this program's lives have been protected by horseshoe crabs, because, if you've had any kind of a flu shot or anything like that. And of course, now all of the new vaccines for COVID and all the antibody tests and all the syringes and the vials used to give these tests all have to be tested to make sure they're free of bacteria. And this is the way they're doing it.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. So everybody, you learn a new thing every day. And I hope that, you know, whether you listen to this interview or another interview, you definitely learned something. That was one new thing I learned as a person that's got their vaccines and is a big proponent of people getting vaccinated. So we have horseshoe crab to thank for the safety of the vaccine. So we'll move back into the interview. And again, this is William Sargent. Again, he is the author of Crab Was. Can you tell people, you know, we're New England guys, so we know about horseshoe crabs. A lot of people don't even know what the heck they are. And I know you talked a little bit at the beginning of the interview, and as we go on, we'll learn more about them. Can you tell people where they are mostly found in the U.S.?
Sure, and I just happen to have one right here.
Okay.
And you know, as a New England kid, you could probably tell me if this is a dead horseshoe crab or not.
Oh, are you asking me or telling me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. I didn't know. I thought you were just saying that for the views. I'm gonna say it's dead. Oh
Okay.
no.
Do you want to guess? Do you want to guess again?
Okay, so it's definitely alive then. Okay.
You want to guess again?
I'm not I'm gonna let you talk then.
Okay. If you look carefully along the leading edge of the shell, you can see that it's cracked. Actually, if I hold it this way, you can
Okay.
see where the shell has broken away. So what happens is a crack forms along the leading edge of the shell. The horseshoe crab crawls out and leaves the empty shell behind.
Right.
So this is just the empty shell of a horseshoe crab. But you can see it. It's got all of the legs and it's got the gills. Those gills indicate to you that their closest living relatives are spiders. So we call them horseshoe crabs, but in fact they're not real crabs. They're more closely related to the arachnids or the spiders. And I forget where we were going with your question.
I honestly don't even
Oh, I know. You were asking where we find them.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Basically, you find them from Maine all the way down to Florida, and even you go down, you know, to the Yucatan Peninsula. But the largest crabs, you get the largest crabs and the most crabs in Delaware Bay, and then they get smaller and fewer as they go both north and south. So, for instance, this one, this came from Plum Island Sound, which is north of Boston, and it actually has the smallest horseshoe crabs, you know, on the East Coast. So this might be a 20-year-old crab. If it were in Delaware Bay, a 20-year-old crab would be the size of a dinner plate. It would be almost 4 or 5 times larger than this and would weigh about 10 pounds.
What made you want to write this kind of book?
Well, as I found out more about the industry, and you know, I've always been intrigued with the crabs. I just realized it was a really good story, because there's all kinds of fascinating aspects of it. I'll ask you another question. Do you know how many eyes they have?
I'm gonna say 6 as a guess.
I'll give you 5 points for that. Do you want another guess?
Well, if
You
you
didn't
gave
know
me
that I
5
was going to
points for
ask.
6, I'll say 10 then.
I'll give you another 5 points for that.
20.
Oh no, you lost your 5 points.
15.
No, they actually have 9 eyes in all. And as
I
a
was
matter of
going the
fact,
wrong way.
you would, yeah, you wouldn't have guessed that. I actually used to give these natural history talks to people down in Woods Hole, and I'd take them on a little tour around the laboratories and everything like that. And I would tell them that the horseshoe crabs had 9 eyes because I knew the guy that had studied them and he had counted them and everything. And then we would go into the Marine Biological Laboratory Visitors Center, and there'd be a great big National Geographic poster saying they had 10 eyes. So I finally gave up and said, okay, they have 10 eyes, but they actually have 9 eyes. But most of what we know about human vision comes from research on the optic nerve of the horseshoe crab that runs from these 2 compound eyes on the side. Then they have 3 little simple eyes up in front. And then they have a whole bunch of vestigial eyes underneath.
Wow.
But most of what we know about human vision comes from studying the optic nerve that runs from these compound eyes to the mouth. And the mouth lies in a circle around their brains. So actually, excuse me, the brain lies in a circle around the mouth. So these guys actually eat through their brains. I don't know if you do that. I do that about 3 times a day. But there was a Dr. H. Keffer Hartline who won the Nobel Prize in 1967 for his research on the optic nerve of the crab.
So now there's a new test, and we were talking about the blood, and you brought that up earlier on in the interview. So the lysate tests, can you talk about that? And does it hurt crabs or not when they do it? And I know there's that synthetic test that's going on now with the FDA. So I know that was like 3 questions in one, but if you could just kind of elaborate on all that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll go back to our prop here. And what they do is they put the crabs into a wooden rack, and then they bleed them right through. There's a little hinge here between the forward and the latter part of the crab, and then they just allow for a free flow of blood. And after it stops flowing, they stop the bleeding, and they've taken about 30% of the blood out.
Wow.
And then what they do is they spin out the cells. These guys have what are called amoebocyte cells. We've been hearing a lot about the immune system because of COVID. And, humans have a very, very complicated immune system. We have about 26 different kinds of cells that all go to the area and fight the infection. What horseshoe crabs have is a single kind of very primitive cell called an amoebocyte cell, and they simply migrate to the area and coagulate and keep the infection out. So, if we have a wound, all our antibodies go to fight the infection inside the body. What these guys can do is coagulate and keep the infection outside of the body. So it's a very primitive system, but it's worked for 450 million years, and now we are able to use that test to test for bacteria. But another part of that story is you get a little white flatworm called Delura Candida, and you'll see them crawling around the legs on a live one. And what they do is they lay their eggs in the gills of the horseshoe crab. And when the eggs hatch out, they tear the tissues of the gills, and that allows the bacteria to get in, because these guys, live in shallow waters that are actually teeming with bacteria, things like E. coli and various things like that. So they're very, very susceptible to that, and they've evolved this very primitive but very effective immune system.
So just to finish off now, are the pharmaceutical companies hurting the industry now because they're doing, it seems like to me, especially with COVID, they're scooping up these crabs left and right and doing their research, which is fine. We do need the research, but they also seem to me like they are hurting the industry. Is that correct or no?
Absolutely. So if you keep these crabs alive and use them for the lysate, what you could do is you go out and you catch them in the wild, and you bring them back into the laboratory and you bleed them, and then you return them to the wild. So that should be done with no mortality. But under industrial conditions, quite often the truck won't show up and the crabs will be left out in the sun. and then you'll get up to 50% mortality. So each, and also if you simply use the horseshoe crabs for the lysate, for the biomedical purposes, each crab is worth about $1,500. Wow. If you chop them up and use them for bait, they're worth about 30 cents a pound. And this was actually what they were doing, particularly in the mid-Atlantic states. They were using these for bait for conchs and eels. If you've ever had scungili, they had to use the horseshoe crabs as bait to catch the conchs. So that was a problem. And now, because of COVID, the demand for horseshoe crabs has gone way up.
So my question is that there's also an issue, not just with this, but the regulations on the regular fishermen, and how is that affecting them also?
Well, what states have started to do, and the federal government are all starting to come up with regulations. The state of South Carolina has actually banned all use of horseshoe crabs for bait, so you can only use them for biomedical purposes. And I think that's the direction we should be going in. And I remember years ago, I used to talk about this to various groups and on radio programs, and I thought I'd get a lot of pushback from fishermen. But they said, no, it's not a problem at all. There are several other species that we can use. So they use things like spider crabs for bait, and they work just as well.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because a lot of people didn't know that. Again, for people that are listening, this is William Sargent. He is the author of Crab Wars. Definitely check it out. So I also assume, so it's almost another double-edged sword, because, I hear all these things about climate change and how they are affecting the oceans. And as somebody that's been in Florida for quite so many years, been down to the Keys, saw the bleaching of the coral reefs down there. And, we also talk about Australia too, and the issues with their coral reefs, and also the overfishing. I mean, the list goes on and on. How has climate change affect the industry and crabs in general?
Well, it's affecting them in a number of ways. Actually, one of the interesting things about horseshoe crabs is that you have about a dozen shorebirds, many of them endangered, whose lives are dependent on horseshoe crab eggs. So, for instance, there's a bird called the red knot, and it travels from the tip of South America and Tierra del Fuego all the way up to the Arctic Circle. And what they will do is that 80% of all the red knots in the world will be on the beaches of Delaware Bay when the horseshoe crabs are laying their eggs. And then they eat 40 tons of horseshoe crab eggs, and then that gives them the energy to fly up on the next leg up to the Arctic Circle. So one concern that people might have is that with global warming, the crabs might come in earlier, and then the birds would be coming up because they're triggering their migrations are being triggered by the day length. So you could get the two could be out of sync. I actually don't think that is so much of a problem, because the trigger that horseshoe crabs use is well, what's kind of interesting is that these guys migrate offshore and they dig down into the sediments, and then they'll be in the sediments until a year later, and then they have to know exactly when to come up out of those sediments and make it to shore. So what do you think the trigger might be for that? Another trick question.
Yeah, no, right. Well, I go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. So they're under the sand, so they can't see daylight.
Right.
They don't feel any change in the temperature, because it's they're under there, and they just don't feel it. So what they're able to do is they have an internal clock, and they can keep track of time over a full year. If you take a human and put us in an isolation tank so that we don't have any triggers of what's going on, we go totally bananas in about 24 hours. Horseshoe crabs can stay down there and they keep track of time, you know, second by second, through a full 365 years. And then they know 365 days, and then they know it's time to come up and make their way toward the beaches to lay their eggs. So, you know, one of the reasons people, you know, first started studying these horseshoe crabs is because, you know, they were primitive and they felt that they were simple, so that they would be simple to study. And of course, as it turns out, they're not simple at all. You know, they have ultraviolet vision, they have 9 eyes, they have this intricate immune system, and they have this internal biological clock that is, you know, one of the most accurate in the animal kingdom.
But I want to ask you this. So you don't see any way that there could be an extinction of the horseshoe crab anytime soon? Because, you know, you did talk about how that could affect the ecosystem if that did happen. So you're saying that pretty much won't happen as far as you know.
I don't think you're going to see them going extinct. I mean, they've been around, you know, since way before there were birds, fish, you know, mammals, dinosaurs, all the things that we're used to. When they first came up on land, the only thing on land were little tiny mosses and ferns and a few insects with about a 3-foot long wingspan. So they've been around through, actually, they've been around through 6 different extinctions on Earth. Wow. You know, because of volcanoes, because of asteroids, because of ice ages, all of these things, and they've been able to, you know, to survive that. So I think what's going to happen is that eventually the Food and Drug Administration will accept this artificial form of lysate, and then the lysate industry for natural lysate will go kaput. And then the horseshoe crabs and also the fisheries for horseshoe crabs will come to an end. And then the horseshoe crabs will have about another 1 million years to recover. You know, I don't think Jimmy the Greek would give us such good odds as that.
I agree with that. Anyways, as we go to the end of the interview, again, this is William Sargent. He is the author of Crab Wars. William, as we end, can you tell the viewers what you hope they learn from this book and from the interview too, for that matter?
Well, I think you know, a great respect for horseshoe crabs in particular, but nature in general. I mean, when you think about it, it's pretty amazing. Here we are, you know, we consider ourselves a very advanced species, but, you know, we are being plagued by these tiny little viruses that are, they're not really dead and they're not really alive. They're just little bits of matter, you know, that has killed probably close to, you know, 10 million people. But our lives are being saved and protected by this arachnid that's 450 million years old. So it shows you that, you know, we're all connected. We're all you know, we're all relatives of each other, and that's why they can protect us from these viruses.
Agreed, 100%. So let's end with this. Again, William Sargent, he is the author of Crab Wars. Where can people get the book and find more about you, William?
Well, you can, the easy way, of course, is through Amazon. You can also get them through my website, which is williamsargent.net. And you can get them, of course, through your local bookstore.
Okay, great. So williamsargent.net. Anything else going on that people should look for you in the coming months and the year?
Well, I did, just before this book, I wrote a book called Terror by Error, which was actually the first book that looked at the idea that COVID came about because of a lab accident.
Yes.
And, partly that came because of, research that I'd done on the horseshoe crab industry. And, there were a lot of accidents. And if you talk to any scientist, you get them into an over a beer conversation and you ask them, have you ever had any accidents in your lab? And they'll just laugh. They'll say, of course. They're doing cutting edge science. And, there are accidents all the time. Sometimes they lead to great discoveries. As a matter of fact, the discovery of horseshoe crab blood's ability to detect bacteria came from an accident. There was this Dr. Frederick Bang, and he had a horseshoe crab in his laboratory, and the horseshoe crab sludged up and died. And most people would just say, well, that's too bad. I'll get another crab and do another experiment. He realized that something interesting was going on, and from that we've created the horseshoe crab blood test.
All right.
I will mention one other thing, and that is if you find a horseshoe crab upside down on the beach, they're in real danger. And probably, as another New England kid, you probably grew up thinking that their tail was some kind of a stinger, and that they would use it as a weapon, either offensively or defensively. Actually, what they use that tail for is they arch their back and then they rock back and forth, and then they can flip themselves over. And so if you do, and if they do find themselves on their back, they're in mortal danger, because then all kinds of birds can get to them, and they'll dry out. So if you find them on a beach, flipped over like this, just grab them by the edge of the shell and flip them over. I'm getting sand all over my computer to show you these things.
Okay. Well, William Sargent, thanks so much again. Crab Wars, definitely check it out. William Sargent, Crab Wars. Thanks so much for your time, William. I appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.